How does a man rule a country for 42 years and still have the nerve to run again at 92? This isn't just a question, it's a warning. In Cameroon, what began as another rigged election announcement has erupted into something far more powerful, a national uprising. For the first time in a generation, people are rising up not just against a dictator, but against an entire system that has stolen their voices, their resources, and their future. Right now, ordinary citizens, teachers, students, mothers, fathers, are risking everything. Their jobs, their freedom, even their lives. Why? Because the cost of silence has become too high. Hunger is rising. Fear is everywhere. And behind it all stands one man, Paul Biya, Africa's longest ruling president. A leader whose reign has been marked by brutality, silence, and luxury. A man who's spent nearly 1,500 days abroad, while hospitals back home operate without electricity. But let's be clear, this isn't just about one man. It's about the system that allowed him to rule unchecked for 4 decades. A system built on foreign interests, corruption, and complicity. For years, powers like France and the United States backed Biya in the name of stability, ignoring the cost paid by the Cameroonian people. And now, for the first time, that silence is breaking. In this video, we're not just telling the story of Paul Biya, we're uncovering how power really works when the world isn't paying attention. We'll expose the machinery of dictatorship, the betrayal of global alliances, and the voices that refuse to be silenced. Because what's happening in Cameroon is not just a political crisis, it's a fight for survival. It's a nation at a crossroads. And whether you're watching from Yaoundé or New York, this story matters. Before we dive in, I want to say this: I created this channel to shine a light on stories that never make it to the headlines, stories like this one. So if you care about truth, justice, and the future of Africa, hit that subscribe button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and together, let's keep this conversation alive. Now, let's get into it. Paul Biya didn't seize power with tanks or speeches. He didn't lead a revolution or fight for independence. He didn't even win over the people. He was selected, quietly, surgically, behind closed doors. In 1975, Biya was appointed Prime Minister by Cameroon's first president, Amadou Ahidjo. He wasn't charismatic. He wasn't popular. What he was loyal. A soft-spoken bureaucrat who knew how to keep his head down and follow orders. So when Ahidjo mysteriously stepped down in 1982, Biya slid into the presidency with barely a whisper. No vote. No movement. Just a signature, and a country handed over. But what followed was anything but passive. Biya may have entered through the back door, but once inside, he locked it behind him. He moved fast. Purging rivals, consolidating power, and surrounding himself with loyalists who owed him everything. Then, in classic strongman style, he rewrote the rules. In 1992, Cameroon finally allowed multi-party elections. For a moment, it looked like democracy might take root. The opposition surged. The people voted. And Biya? He nearly lost. That narrow escape changed everything. From that day forward, elections would still happen, but losing was no longer an option. He tightened control over the courts, media, and military. He used state resources to crush dissent, intimidate voters, and jail opponents. In 2008, and again in 2011, he changed the constitution, abolishing term limits altogether. The presidency became a throne. Power became permanent. But Biya's genius wasn't just in suppressing opposition, it was in disappearing from responsibility. Unlike loud autocrats, Biya ruled with distance. He avoided interviews, dodged the press, vanished for months at a time. Cameroon was run not by a man, but by an image, untouchable, unquestioned, unseen. And behind that image, a fortress was built, made of loyal ministers, secret police, corrupt businessmen, and foreign protectors. This wasn't just a presidency. It was a machine. Over the decades, anyone who challenged it was silenced. Some were arrested. Others exiled. Many simply disappeared. The system didn't need to shout. It just needed to survive. For 42 years, it did. But today, that survival is being questioned, not just by protesters in the streets, but by an entire generation that refuses to be afraid. While most Cameroonians were scraping by, walking miles for clean water, sitting in classrooms with broken desks, and waiting in hospitals with no medicine, Paul Biya was living like a king. Just not in Cameroon. Between 2006 and 2017, Biya spent more than 1,500 days abroad. That's over 4 full years of his presidency, gone. Not on state visits or urgent diplomatic missions, but in luxury hotel suites, mainly in Switzerland, where entire floors were booked for his entourage. In a single year, he reportedly spent over $1 million in public funds on private jets and 5-star resorts. While his people queued for rice, he sipped champagne behind palace walls. This wasn't just a leadership gap, it was a symbol. A country falling apart, while its president lounged thousands of miles away. Back home, things were unraveling. Roads were impassable. Power outages became routine. Hospitals lacked basic supplies. In rural areas, children still drank from muddy wells and studied under leaking roofs. Teachers worked for months without pay. And yet, billions of dollars earmarked for infrastructure, education, and healthcare simply vanished. Where did it go? The answer lies in the heart of a regime built on systemic corruption. In 2018, Biya's own defense minister was caught embezzling nearly $400 million meant for military contracts. In 2020, a national audit revealed that COVID-19 relief funds were being siphoned off before vaccines even arrived. Across ministries, the story was the same: fake contracts, inflated budgets, stolen funds, and zero accountability. But the corruption didn't weaken Biya. It strengthened him. Because in his regime, stealing wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. The more his inner circle stole, the more loyal they became. Everyone's hands were dirty, and that made everyone quiet. This toxic loyalty turned Cameroon into a country where public office meant private fortune, and where exposure meant elimination. But even the most well-oiled corrupt systems have limits. The cracks are showing. The contrast between opulence and poverty has become too sharp to ignore. And now, for the first time in decades, people are demanding not just answers, but justice. Because Cameroon isn't poor. It was plundered. In Cameroon, telling the truth can cost you your life. And for journalist Martinez Zogo, it did. Zogo wasn't just a radio host, he was a loud, fearless voice in a country where most had gone quiet. Week after week on his show, he did what few dared to do: name names, expose corruption, and shine a light into the darkest corners of Cameroon's elite. But in late 2022, he uncovered something that would ultimately seal his fate. According to Zogo's investigation, millions of dollars were being funneled directly from Cameroon's Ministry of Finance into a private company tied to Jean-Pierre Amogu Balinga, a powerful media mogul with deep connections to the presidency. Zogo didn't stop at Balinga. He pointed the finger higher, all the way to President Paul Biya himself. He said it publicly. Repeatedly. Relentlessly. Then, on January 17, 2023, Martinez Zogo never made it home. He was abducted in broad daylight, snatched by men who moved like professionals. For 5 days, he was missing. When his body was finally found on the outskirts of Yaoundé, it was a horror scene, tortured, mutilated, and dumped. The country was stunned. But not surprised. Because under Biya's rule, journalists don't just vanish, they're erased. This wasn't an isolated case. It was a message. Speak too loudly, and you won't speak again. Authorities opened an investigation. High-profile figures were questioned. Rumors swirled. But no justice came. Instead, the air filled with fear and resolve. Zogo's death could have silenced others. Instead, it ignited a fire. Cameroonians saw in his murder the rotten core of their regime, a state where truth is punished, not protected. A state where theft isn't hidden, it's enforced. And a state where exposing corruption isn't journalism, it's a death sentence. Yet in that darkness, something shifted. People who once whispered began to shout. Protesters held banners with Zogo's name. His story spread across Africa, and beyond. Not because he was the first to die, but because he refused to die quietly. And in doing so, he became something Biya never expected, a symbol of courage in a nation suffocating in fear. On the surface, Cameroon looks like a united nation, one flag, one president, one government. But beneath that image lies a deep, painful divide that has torn communities apart and taken thousands of lives. It's called the Anglophone crisis, and most of the world still doesn't even know it exists. Cameroon has 2 official languages, French and English. But in reality, French dominates every aspect of public life, government, education, the courts. The English-speaking regions, primarily in the northwest and southwest, have long been treated as second-class citizens. For years, this tension simmered quietly. But in 2016, it boiled over. It began with lawyers and teachers, peaceful protests asking for basic rights. The right to teach in English, the right to use English in court, the right to be treated equally in their own country. They didn't ask for independence. They asked for fairness. The government responded with force. Armed soldiers were deployed. Protests were crushed. People were beaten, arrested, and even killed. When communities resisted, the government didn't open dialogue, they labeled them terrorists. Entire villages were burned. Families fled into the forest. Some still live there, hiding from their own military. Over 6,000 people have been killed. Nearly 1 million have been displaced. What began as a peaceful movement for equal rights has become a hidden civil war, one that could have been prevented if the government had simply listened. But listening has never been Biya's style. Under his regime, opposition isn't debated, it's criminalized. Requests for equality are treated as threats to national security. And the people who ask to be treated like citizens are labeled enemies of the state. Meanwhile, international media barely covers it. Foreign governments call for dialogue, but take no action. And Biya? He remains silent, watching from afar as his soldiers destroy the very regions he's supposed to protect. But even in the ashes, resistance lives on. From student activists to grieving mothers, Anglophone Cameroonians are refusing to disappear. Their voices are louder than ever, not just demanding rights, but exposing the lie at the heart of the nation: Cameroon is not united. It is divided. And it has been bleeding in silence for too long. Paulbiya didn't rule alone. Behind every dictatorship that survives this long, there are quiet partners, foreign governments, corporations, and military alliances that claim to support democracy but choose stability over justice. In Cameroon's case, those partners have names: France and the United States. On paper, Cameroon gained independence from France in 1960. In reality, France never left. Through secretive economic agreements and long-standing military deals, France has maintained deep control over Cameroon's currency, industries, and army. Cameroon's currency, the CFA franc, is still tied to France's central bank. French companies control massive stakes in Cameroon's oil, gas, telecom, and banking sectors. And under old colonial-era pacts, French troops continue to train Cameroonian forces. And Paul Biya? He was the perfect client. He gave them access, protected their interests, made sure the oil kept flowing and the money kept moving. In return, France gave him the one thing he needed most: silence. When journalists disappeared, France said nothing. When elections were rigged, they shrugged. When Anglophone communities were bombed and burned, they issued vague calls for dialogue. Even as billions were stolen from schools, hospitals, and COVID relief, France looked the other way. Critics call it neocolonialism, a system designed in Paris, but enforced in Yaoundé. And for decades, it worked. But France wasn't alone. The United States, too, quietly propped up Biya's regime, especially in the name of counterterrorism. As Boko Haram threatened northern Cameroon, Biya positioned himself as a key ally in the region. The U.S. responded with support, military advisors, training, equipment, and intelligence. And Biya used it all, not just to fight terrorism, but to tighten his grip on power. He jailed opposition leaders, crushed protests, and labeled critics as extremists. The U.S. occasionally condemned human rights abuses, but never imposed sanctions. Never withdrew aid. Never made real demands for reform. Because in global politics, usefulness often trumps accountability. But today, Cameroonians are no longer waiting for outside saviors. They're calling out the silence. They're rejecting the foreign deals that enriched a dictator and impoverished a nation. And they're asking the question that foreign powers hoped would never be asked. Who kept Biya in power for 42 years? And more importantly, why? At 92 years old, Paul Biya isn't just Africa's oldest president, he's one of the oldest heads of state in the world. And yet, in January 2025, he announced he would run again. But even his most loyal supporters are starting to whisper what many have known for years: he's no longer capable. For over a decade, Biya has vanished for months at a time. No speeches. No press briefings. No cabinet meetings. Reports suggest he spent much of that time in private Swiss hospitals, battling age-related conditions, from heart complications to rumored dementia. When he does appear, it's painful to watch: slurred speech, confusion, long silences. It's not leadership. It's a slow-motion collapse. And yet, the regime keeps moving. Now, rumors are swirling that Biya is preparing to hand power to his son, Frank Biya. A man with no experience, no public mandate, and no credibility. Just a last name. Critics call it the beginning of a dynasty. Cameroonians call it an insult. Because this isn't just about a man overstaying his time. It's about a system that believes power is inherited, not earned. A country crumbling, while its leader fades behind closed doors. A people asked to suffer in silence while the elite plan their next move. But now, the silence is over. For the first time in 42 years, Cameroon's people are speaking clearly. In the streets. On social media. In courtrooms and classrooms. They're not just rejecting Biya, they're rejecting the lie that Cameroon is poor, powerless, or broken beyond repair. Because here's the truth. Cameroon isn't poor. It was robbed. It's one of the most resource-rich nations in Central Africa: oil, gold, timber, fertile farmland. This should be a country building world-class hospitals, universities, and highways. A place of opportunity. A place of dignity. Instead, it became a fortress of corruption, where public money filled private bank accounts, and a generation was told to wait for change that never came. But they're not waiting anymore. Today, a new chapter is being written, not by presidents or foreign investors, but by ordinary people. By young activists, whistleblowers, teachers on strike, mothers marching with signs. By voices once silenced, now refusing to be ignored. This moment is about more than paulbiya. It's about what comes next. Because once a nation learns to speak the truth, once people realize the power they've been told they don't have, there's no turning back. So whether Biya steps down or clings to power one last time, the illusion is fading. The old system is cracking. And for the first time in decades, Cameroon's future won't be written in Paris boardrooms or Washington war rooms, it'll be written by the people themselves. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Backhand index pointing right. Hit subscribe to follow more untold stories from across Africa. Backhand index pointing right. Share this video, not just to spread awareness, but to amplify voices that have been silenced for too long. Backhand index pointing right. And if you want to see what revolution can really look like, check out our deep dive on Burkina Faso's Uprising, where a new kind of leadership is emerging, with lessons for all of us. Thanks for watching, and more importantly, thanks for caring. Across the African continent, people are watching Cameroon not with distance, but with recognition. In the markets of Accra, the cafés of Nairobi, the streets of Kinshasa, there's a quiet understanding. Because what's happening in Cameroon doesn't feel like someone else's story. It feels like ours. Ask a young Nigerian about Biya, and they'll tell you about their own leaders clinging to power. Ask a Ghanaian, and they'll tell you about promises broken, schools abandoned, and jobs that never came. Ask a Zimbabwean, and they'll recall the pain of watching a hero become a tyrant. Because across Africa, the story of paulbiya is not an exception, it's a pattern. A pattern of leaders who stay too long. Of wealth that flows out while poverty stays in. Of foreign governments that shake hands with dictators, then pretend to care about human rights. A pattern of silence, our silence, their silence, the world's silence. But something is changing. From Bamako to Banjul, from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, people are starting to say what once felt too dangerous: we deserve better. Not just less corruption, but more dignity. Not just cheaper food, but stronger institutions. Not just leaders who leave, but leaders who serve. There's a generation rising across this continent. Young, restless, and unafraid. They've seen the lies. They've grown up watching their countries be looted, their hopes dismissed, their futures sold off in contracts they never signed. And now, they're saying, enough. They're inspired by figures like Ibrahim Traoré, who, whether you agree with his methods or not, represents something rare in African politics: a break from the script. Someone who didn't wait for permission to protect his people. Someone who put Africa's sovereignty before foreign applause. And now, when Cameroonians fill the streets, they're not alone. They're joined in spirit by millions across Africa who see in their defiance a reflection of their own struggle. Because deep down, across this continent, we all want the same thing: to be seen, to be heard, and to matter. Cameroon's uprising is not just theirs. It's ours. And no matter what the future holds, no matter how many regimes fight to stay in power, no matter how loud the propaganda gets, we have already learned to speak. And once a people learn to speak, they never forget how.